Greetings, everyone. My name's Robin Lloyd, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to Pierce Hall, which is an amazing community center that has been refurbished and sort of recreated in the last 10 years by a group of Rochester residents to be a gorgeous hall, and we are making it even more gorgeous with our posters here. I hope you all have the program in your hands, and that you can write comments if you like on the question on the lines there, and then have those comments to ask in the Q&A or in the forum at the end. For those of you who are new to Rochester, I just want to say a few words about this town. I've lived here off and on, and I've often thought of it as dead center Vermont. By that I mean left, north, south, east, west, center. And as a center, it's really quite a remarkable place. There is, the village here sustains 2 theater groups, 4 restaurants, 2 bookstores, and a flourishing library, an art center, and a 5-star bike shop. Now, I may not have touched on all the wonderful things here, but I think it's not bad for a little hamlet centered here in central Vermont, out of which many spokes flow, as you can see. So I'm here as a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, an organization founded in 1915 to stop World War I. It kept going in the 30s to stop World War II. And we're here today to stop World War III, which is looming in front of us. And something that needs to be realized, that when weapons are made, they end up being used. And that's a frightening, almost invariably, that's the frightening thing, that there is a buildup now in weapons, not just nuclear weapons, but armaments of all kinds. And so we're doing this in the midst of floods and fires and a climate catastrophe. What is going on? Why is this happening? Why is our government taking us in this direction? So our 3 speakers will grapple with these issues and help us find a way out. But first, the 2 other sponsors of this event, which is which is Action Corps and Vermont Peace Anti-War Action, will say a few words. So I think, Duncan, you want to come up and introduce this brand new organization that we've created in the last 6 months.
Robin has left extra time for me. So I'm going to read what I have to say. I've been sort of working on something to say. And so one of the sponsors here, besides Action Corps and WILPF, which is, I would say, the main sponsor here, is Vermont Peace Anti-War Coalition. And Nancy Rice and Robin and I kind of got it going, and now there's a bunch of us. And we have a pretty good list of people, email mostly, but we're starting to get out there on social media. So in a way, it's a new way of doing politics and action by online, which I really don't like that idea. But it is the new way, and we got to do it. I think Code Pink is so good at it. They have a wonderful website. But anyway, I'll just read what I have to say. We got to get up after we get knocked down. There's always a few coalitions that come around at a time like this. And the Vermont Peace Anti-War Coalition is just another one of them. Ephemeral, but organizing like bees. Nancy, by Robin, by Cree, by Chris, by Lynn, by Renee, by me. Many others in local action started from humble beginnings in the summer of 2022, when we could see nothing was happening. And NATO was growing like, I did write brain cancer, but NATO was growing like a cancer. And as it does. But now, particularly with this new war in Europe, what's great about this is about having a new coalition is that and this particular coalition is that we don't all have to be in lockstep. We can have different opinions. Here's my view, which will be different from yours, perhaps. This Vermont, I think to myself, a lifelong Vermonter, this Vermont, it's looking like a forward operating base for war. The Vermont Air Guard deploys of Burlington deploys to Germany in the spring of 2022. An innocent act. Another mission to maintain a robust defense. This Vermont, I think to myself, is a forward operating base, like the other states who are all creating these weapons. They're all part of making these weapons. The F-35 in Burlington is produced in every state, except maybe 3. You know, who knows where those submarines are produced, but we're all making them, all these states, all these high-end jobs, and that's a tough one for us. But anyway, Vermont. So the Vermont Guard has sent 45% of its men and women to the conflicts, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So our Vermont Guard, over the years, has deployed overseas. And they're deployed now. That's 45%. You know, so that's a Vermont issue. These are our children. So let's see what Vermont has for resistance to war and being militarized. Maybe a coalition? Where are they that organized against the Iraq war? Well, there was coalitions, and some of them are here. Joseph Gainza, Robin, Nancy. We are, for the moment, a Vermont Peace Anti-War Coalition. Take our flyer. Take our flyer over at that table, and Action Corps has literature. I think it has the, what's it called? The Vermont Vision for a New Foreign Policy. And there's a bunch of groups here, but take our flyers, take them all, and please sign up. If you go to our website, which is on our flyer, there's a button you push, and you're all signed up, and we'll send you an email, and we'll send you instructions on what to do. So the F-35 nuclear bomber that Burlington area people have been fighting against, but yet flies every day and night here in Vermont, upstate New York, and God knows where else, is deployed to NATO countries, as well as Israel and other allies. I think Saudi Arabia has the F-35. So this is a Vermont training base for this new plane. And it would be accurate to say that we are a forward operating base. But we're facing floods, and in Vermont, we're facing farms going underwater. Environmental problems of smoke and floods, how many 100-year storms can we have in a decade and call them 100-year events? And all they offer our pain, is silence. What shall we do? There's a clipboard over there, and we'd love to have you give us your mailing address or your email address, and we'll send you some simple instructions on how you can chip in. We don't want money, we just want you to make phone calls or write letters. What's going on now is silence. So when Peter Welch wrote me a few months ago, Peter Welch said, I want to stop war too. Thank you for coming, to our mental health town meeting. And I wrote, my statement, and he wrote me in his own hand. You've got to love him for that. He wrote me in his own hand, but he's funding these wars. And he has been his whole career in Congress. Now he's a senator. So silence is what we get. Now, the Zapatistas of southern Mexico, who are still around, they're an indigenous group, and they have an army now. They have a military wing, like the Salvadoran rebels did. They say that the silence that we hear from the government, what they give us is silence for our pain, is a time for us to listen to each other. So I would say that we take this really bad situation, which is the propaganda is so intense, and have that a time for us to gestate, organize, be ourselves, be a coalition, be an individual, do what you can. And I'm being asked to give up the mic, which I should. But one last thing is, so my local newspaper, the Valley News, has the headline, this is a few months ago, maybe it was a few weeks ago, Ukraine push is coming. Keep hopes in check. To me, that's silence. It's emptiness. What it means is, don't tell us what you think, because we're already telling you what to think.
Hello all. I'm Christine Mayer. I'm helping Robin organize the event today. I just wanted to have everyone look at your programs really quickly and note that there is space for notes and questions. So if during one of these talks you find that you are holding in a question or something you really want to discuss later, that there is a space to note it, so you don't have to not concentrate on the talk. Also, just so you know, restrooms are down the stairs, and there is elevator access. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that. Thank you so much. Isaac, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Duncan, for what you just shared, and I want to encourage you all to do the opposite of what that newspaper headline says, and don't keep hope in check. Let's hope really boldly and wildly. Thank you, Robin, for bringing us together. Organizing is a courageous act, and there's always the risk that if you organize something, no one will show up. And you all showed up, so thank you for doing that. When I was a child growing up in Brattleboro, I heard a Nazi death camp survivor speak about his experience. And after that, I got the idea that if there were ever a situation on Earth that I knew about some crisis, some disaster, humanitarian crisis like the Holocaust, I would want to do everything I could to stand up and stop that. So when I heard about the humanitarian crisis in Yemen and that the United States was supporting the Saudi-led coalition in bombing and blockading the poorest country in the Middle East and had become the largest humanitarian crisis on the planet, I thought, okay, well, where's an opportunity to do something about this? I was part of a group called Action Corps. It's a banner up there, which now has volunteers in 30 states who meet with their members of Congress. And one of the first campaign that we took on was stopping U.S. participation in this war in Yemen. This has been going on for over 8 years. And although the bombs have stopped since April of last year, the blockade continues, which is economic warfare against the people of Yemen. Senator Bernie Sanders is a key player in this effort to stop the war, but we haven't seen public statements from him about stopping U.S. participation in the war until this past Thursday. And why this past Thursday? It's because a bunch of Vermonters showed up at his senior town hall lunch summer celebration in Brattleboro and delivered a petition to him that many of you signed. About 900 people so far have signed it. We're hoping to get to 1,000 this weekend. It was delivered and asked him about the war in Yemen. And the petition, it's not just about Yemen, it's about ending endless war. The petition talks about the crisis in Ukraine, talks about cluster bombs, talks about Israel. We asked him, what's going on? In December, you said you were going to be back on the Senate floor, the action about Yemen. Action, if we didn't get strong and effective action, you would be back, and we haven't heard anything from you. And that got him to speak about congressional war powers and why Congress needs to be the one that decides about war, not the president. And for so many administrations have just gone ahead and waged war in other countries without consulting Congress. So he's in a good place right now, but we need to keep pushing. And this is something we could win. We could actually get him to reintroduce his Yemen War Powers resolution. He could do that at any point. He just calls up the clerk of the Senate, and you got a War Powers resolution introduced. And this is a way to not just push on Yemen, but to push on ending endless war. So he's going to be in St. Johnsbury on Tuesday at noon, and then that same day he'll be up in Newport. Vermonters could be showing up and asking, hey, are you going to do the things in that petition that folks from Action Corps delivered in Brattleboro last Thursday? The other thing is that you can all sign that petition. Robert, where are you? Oh, Robert's in the back here. And over at lunch, which is just about an hour, he's going to have his laptop out, and you can actually go in and sign this petition. And we'll keep on delivering this petition until we achieve our goal. The other thing that you can do is on Monday, just in 2 days, you can make a phone call to Becca Ballant's office. You can, in the back of this program, there are 3 different pieces of legislation that she could co-sponsor. You can ask her to do that. And then you can also use the number that's on the back of this and call Bernie's Vermont office. We know he's in Vermont right now. And say, hey, I'm calling to support Action Corps' petition to end endless war that was just delivered in Brattleboro. That's all you have to say, and that will help keep this on his radar, keep the push for this effort to end the endless war. Let's see. The thing that I see that's really exciting to me and gives me hope about the Vermont Peace and Anti-War Coalition is unity and solidarity. That we're working on a whole lot of different projects around this little state. But when we come together and we support each other, we can be a force for change. And it doesn't have to be like it is right now. And that's why we put together this Vermonters' Vision for a New Foreign Policy, which you can pick up over on that table. That putting out an idea of how we'd like things to be different. And so I encourage you to support all the efforts of this coalition and see how we can work together to make that vision a reality. Thank you.
Okay, so it's my honor to introduce, It's my honor to introduce Vicki Elson. She, together with her husband, Timon Wallace, are the creators of Nuclear Ban US down in Northampton. but they managed to get around the country very well. Vicky is a childbirth educator, a doula, a filmmaker, and a singer. Maybe we will hear some songs later. Timon is a peace educator who lived many years in Scotland, near where the UK Trident submarines are based. That's one of the only submarines outside the United States that have these deadly weapons with nuclear missiles on them. Timon has been International Secretary of Peace Brigades International and Executive Director of Nonviolence Peace Force, an incredible organization that gets to many areas, especially in the developing world, where violence is happening and should not be happening, and helping them talk to each other. Vicky and Timon met while advocating for the nuclear weapons ban treaty, and I was honored to be at their wedding in 2018. And I think out of this combustion of love between them, they created the organization Nuclear Ban US. So WILPF and Nuclear Ban, we've been working in tandem really since then to celebrate the good news of the coming into force through the United Nations process of the treaty prohibiting nuclear weapons, which declares that nuclear weapons are now illegal. So in a sense, we're meeting here today to figure out how to implement such an extraordinary treaty. And we're especially excited to build support for a bill in Congress, the Nuclear Weapons Abolition and Conversion Act of 2023. It's known as the Norton Bill for the woman Eleanor Holmes Norton who created it really. So I think, oh, okay, and you can sign up apparently over there. So I'd like to invite Vicky to come up and explain in more detail what I've been trying to introduce. So I think hold this one.
Thanks, Robin. All right. Just going to plug something in here. Hey, that looks pretty good. Hi, everybody. Hi. Hey, how many WILPers are here? WILPF members. Okay, how many Code Pink members or founders? How many people would like to see an end to both nuclear weapons and the climate disaster, like today? Yeah, I wish I could do that. We're working as hard as we possibly can, and this is the best we have come up with so far. Don't worry, nuclear winter will cure global warming. I like your t-shirt, but I don't think it will work. I mean, it kind of, anyway. So I brought our, oh, thank you. I brought our new booklet. It's a summary of a book that is just now being finished called Warheads to Windmills. And I have a bunch of them. If you want one, they're free. Please take one if you're gonna, especially if you're gonna use it, especially if you're gonna share it, especially if you're going to get more organizations to join the Warheads to Windmills Coalition, which is a coalition of both climate and environmental and peace organizations working together to solve these twin threats. So that's available. If you want to make donations for printing, you're welcome to, and then we can print more. But meanwhile, you're welcome to them. There's a bunch here. And I'm going to be going through a lot of the stuff that's in the booklet. So if you want to take home, you know, so you don't have to take notes, it's all in there. WILPF and Code Pink have been incredible allies. In your booklet, you have some information about some bills. In the back of your booklet, HR 77 is a House Resolution 77 is a resolution not as powerful as a bill and not as powerful as the Norton bill, but useful for politicians or members of the public who are not yet ready to stand for total nuclear abolition. The Norton bill, H.R. 2775, Tim, you might want to mute, is very, very powerful and calls to abolish nuclear weapons by starting by signing the treaty, which would set in motion a process of working with the other nuclear nations to come up with a plan, a safe, fair plan to abolish them, and eventually converting the resources that are wasted on nuclear weapons, converting that to climate solutions. So that's what we're working on. It's kind of a big long-term vision, and it is of utmost urgency. Let me just show you a little bit what's going on here. We drew some windmills on some warheads there for you. The whole point of this is to prevent extinction of us and other species. So here it is in a nutshell. I'm going to, let's see, I need to move our little pictures. Well, anyway, they're going to cover a little bit of the screen. So we need to move the money, trillions of taxpayer dollars, your taxpayer dollars that are going to build nuclear weapons. We need the brain power. We need the smart people. If you graduate with a science or technology or engineering or math degree, chances are you're going to get sucked into the military-industrial complex. And we just met a wonderful mathematician who didn't want that to happen to him, and he just started working on our book, which I thought was a great sign. He's really gung-ho for making the world better instead of going to work for that. And then the jobs, the facilities, the factories can all be moved into climate solutions. And most crucially, the international goodwill that is wasted on nuclear weapons could be shifted to climate solutions. We cannot solve climate while we're pointing nuclear weapons at each other. So climate is a nuclear war issue. The climate is already causing a lot of migration, which is putting a lot of pressure on a lot of countries. And the yellow ones in this picture are nuclear weapons countries. So that's a factor. And then the converse is true. Nuclear weapons are also a climate issue, as your T-shirt points out. You may have seen the report that shows that billions of humans could starve in a nuclear winter caused by a not very big nuclear war. Like if Pakistan and India went after each other with nuclear weapons, I mean, they go after each other all the time. If they were to use a small number of nuclear weapons, they could kick enough soot into the atmosphere to block the sun and cause a massive global famine that knows no boundaries, obviously. So there are some solutions that don't really work. Non-proliferation, meaning don't let other countries have them, but it's okay if we do. Arms control, meaning let's take some measures to not use them so much. Nuclear freeze, which means stop making them, but keep the ones we've got. And minor policy changes like not starting a nuclear war. No first use, that's called. But, where does that leave us in terms of retaliation and using them second? There are other minor policy changes that are, like taking president's finger off the button, no sole authority. Sounds like a good idea, and it is. But should anybody have authority? Should Congress have authority? Should robots have authority? Nobody should have authority over nuclear weapons. By the way, robots don't. And we don't expect them to, but keep an eye out. And then false solutions for climate, things like going coal to gas. That doesn't solve the problem. Biofuels, carbon capture, again, minor policy changes. These are not going to save us from the climate disaster. And nuclear power, our parent organization, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which won the Nobel Peace Prize, I'm proud to say, for facilitating the treaty and for bringing attention to the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons. ICANN doesn't really take a position on nuclear power because they're trying to build all kinds of coalitions. Personally, where Tim and I stand on nuclear power is, well, I can just quote a guy I talked to in the industry itself. He said, nuclear power will never be sustainable until we figure out what to do with the waste. And furthermore, you know, we just put one new nuclear power plant online. It took 30 years. You know, it takes a long time to build these things, even if they were completely safe. And they're also extremely expensive, and they're subsidized by the nuclear weapons industry because they convert plutonium to uranium for bombs. So they're a lot less expensive than they would be were they not subsidized for weapons of mass killing. So a lot of reasons nuclear power is not necessarily a climate solution, although perhaps a little bit of interim use of it while we get everything else, get all the fossil fuels out of the picture. I don't know. Nuclear, but we don't consider that a solution. So the real solutions are this nuclear ban treaty, the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. There's also a fossil fuel treaty, which is just in its early stages. The nuclear ban treaty was adopted by 122 countries in 2018 at the UN. 122 countries, only 195 in the world. Okay? This treaty came from the world to the nuclear countries. Not like the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is 50 years old, and it's among the nuclear countries, and it was about, you know, we can have them, but nobody else should have them. So they consider that a success because when the nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty started, there were 5 nuclear countries, and now there's only 4 more, there's 9. So, you know, that was a success. It's not a success. The Non-Proliferation Treaty has, you know, just failed. It just had a meeting and it failed again to make any real progress. So the Nuclear Ban Treaty has been signed by 92 countries, and it has been ratified by 68. Okay, some of these are big countries, some of these are small countries, but we're expecting more all the time. ICANN is working really hard to get more and more countries on board, and the idea is to bring pressure on the 9 nuclear countries that hold the rest of the world hostage. So that's a real thing. Nuclear weapons are illegal. Everything to do with them is illegal in 68 countries. And in Ireland, which has the strongest enforcement laws so far, you can go to jail for the rest of your life for having anything to do with nuclear weapons. Now I call that, you know, something with teeth, you know, and I find that exciting. Let's see, the Fossil Fuel Treaty is still in early stages. There hasn't been a convention about it or anything at the UN. And unfortunately, some of the people working on it are modeling it on the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which we think that Nuclear Ban Treaty is a better model. But if anybody wants to work on bringing a climate treaty into the world, that would be a wonderful thing to midwife. If we had both, and we could lobby on them both together, wouldn't that be powerful? And the other real solution is we need to stop threatening each other and cooperate. The biggest greenhouse gas emitters who are here are also, as it happens, nuclear weapons countries. Okay? So that makes it really hard to cooperate on climate change. So that's what we need to do. So here's the bad news. I'm sorry. You already know a lot of this stuff, I'm sure. I'll go through it quickly. Global CO2 emissions just keep going up and up and up and up. Okay, and this from right about, can you see my little, is my little thing working? Okay, so from here, oopsie, sorry. From here to here is kind of a replicated here where we see the scenario. So this little thing here is 1990 to the present. So that's that little piece we were looking at in the previous slide. And if we do nothing, this pink area is where we're headed in terms of emissions, okay? And in terms of warming. And you can see that's way too many degrees of warming. With the current policies, we are still not okay. With pledges and targets, we're still not okay. It's just not going down fast enough, and we need to really, really, really bring it down into the, well, the 1.5, the very bottom one, degrees centigrade of global temperature increase is still dangerous, but it's better than if we had no policies at all. Again, I said this was the bad news. Here's what we need to do to get to zero. And that's kind of a complicated chart. We can look at it in more detail later if you want to. But really, this is the map here. This is reducing carbon emissions from now to 2050, enough to make the world safer and try to plateau global warming. Unfortunately, that's not what we're doing. Global carbon emissions are still rising. So you know about the doomsday clock? Okay. The doomsday clock was created by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and it was started back in Oppenheimer's day, to look at the risk of nuclear war. Now the doomsday clock, which is 90 seconds to midnight, also talks about climate, and it also talks about artificial intelligence as being threats to our human survival. So why has it gone up and up and up? This is the nuclear side. From the end of the Cold War at the bottom there to the present time. So you can see when the Cold War ended, it was in one spot, and now it's gone up even more. There is a pathway out of nuclear war, and this chart is very complicated. All this stuff is Tim's brainchild. I got to give him credit. And this complicated chart is in your book, and you can in the book, and you can look at it more closely if you want to. But he has mapped out a pretty exciting pathway. So to solve the climate problem, we need a lot of money. And it so happens, okay, so $1.3 trillion is Tim's calculation. And to solve the nuclear weapons, to make nuclear weapons, to keep making them, costs about the same amount of money. So where are we going to get the money for climate? Easy peasy, right? This is research that we did a few years ago that was based on a report in England that showed that the nuclear weapons jobs and infrastructure and brain power were concentrated in geographical locations, and those same people and those same facilities and those same locations could be converted to climate solutions of various kinds. And without the people even having to move to a different house. They could stay where they are, change industries. And so Tim did a project a few years ago looking at a similar thing, and more needs to be done. This was very preliminary. But what we came up with was something that looks more like that. And this makes me happy, these charts. The black and white, like the Wizard of Oz, it turns color, and this isn't even to scale. There's so many more jobs in green technologies that we actually need to survive. And all those people could go to bed with their kids looking at them with, more hope, instead of like, what are you doing at work exactly? So why is it so difficult to do this? You probably are very well aware of this problem. Senators and congresspeople get money from lobbyists who get money from the corporations, and they all influence the voters, and it's just a revolving door. And the people who run the nuclear weapons industry and the people who run the government, a lot of them are the same people switching back and forth in what they call the revolving door. And it's terrifying. I had an amazing adventure. I infiltrated a meeting of 530 people who are it's called the Nuclear Deterrence Summit near the Pentagon in a hotel basement. I spent 3 days with these very scary people. They weren't just profiteering corporations. They were also members of the military. They were also a couple of senators. And there, a lot of subcontractors were there. And I asked a subcontractor, so what brings you to the summit? I went as a reporter, I said, so what brings you here? And she said, well, just like everybody else, we're just trying to get some money from the government. That's the whole point, And it's a lot of money. So that was a very interesting experience. I learned an awful lot and got very angry and scared. But you can see this is just how it works, and that's the problem. And we have to break this cycle. Clean elections would certainly help. So these are the profiteering companies that are destroying the planet by burning fossil fuels for profit. And these are the companies that are destroying the planet by building nuclear weapons. There aren't that many. There's only like 26 companies. And you can go to Don't Bank on the Bomb or ICANN, or there's a report called Complicit that talks about these companies and exactly what they do. So one thing we can do is divest from fossil fuels, and people are doing this all over the world. There are financial institutions doing this. The city of New York is divesting its pension funds from nuclear weapons. Is that cool? Hasn't done it yet, but they voted to do it. And it was kind of unanimous. Like we were there at this hearing. There were like 60 of us that testified. And then the only person who spoke against it was somebody saying, well, that's going to put a lot more on the plate of my department. And the city councilor said, don't worry about that. We'll take care of that. It's like nobody, there were people there who had worked on the Manhattan Project in Manhattan. And we're talking about how, in their work life, there had been barrels of stuff melting on the floor in Manhattan, radioactive material that was still hot, like right where the High Line is. Unbelievable. So divesting from fossil fuel. Oh, that was fossil. I'm sorry, I was talking about divesting from nukes. Divesting from fossil fuel, there's also a movement for that. I'm sorry, I just mixed up my slides. There's New York, divesting from nuclear weapons. So we want to kind of merge these two divestment movements and save the world two ways. This is Seth Sheldon at the front there, who's with ICANN, working to get everybody to, all the other countries to ratify the treaty. So we can pressure these companies many different ways. We can pressure them by, if the government were to say, we're going to have less nuclear weapons, they would say, well, what can we do? And the government could, this is my dream, the government could say, well, you could convert to green solutions. So that's definitely a goal and a dream. But stranded assets, that's like leaving the oil in the ground. That's a problem for them. Legislative risk is a problem because when their product becomes illegal through treaties or other measures, they are at risk of being in violation of the law, as nuclear weapons companies already are in those 68 countries. Reputational risk, people like us saying, your weapons of, or you're burning fossil fuels and you're building nuclear weapons, well, we talked last night about calling evil, and stigmatizing these companies, these profiteers. Investor anxiety is another problem for them. They can lose contracts and customers. There was a lot of talk at the Deterrence Summit about how hard it is to recruit people to work in the nuclear weapons industry. And it's under the Department of Energy for some reason, which is a bit of greenwashing. And so they have these job fairs, and all these people come to the Department of Energy job fair, and they're all in line for the green technologies thing, that the Department of Energy is doing. And there's a little short line for the nuclear weapons part of it. And they're trying to figure out, well, what do we do to get all those green people to come over to nuclear weapons? And they talked a lot about how you have to keep drilling it into them, that this is an important mission, and this is protecting our country, and this is, it's hard for them to recruit and retain staff. They were promising them a pathway from Taco Bell to building submarines. Like, what a great life choice. And so that's an interesting problem. And then supply chain problems. They were complaining they couldn't even get plywood sometimes, So I was happy to hear about all these problems that they're having, actually. It was nice. So this is another way to put pressure on the companies. That's me in my mask at L3 Harris with a whole bunch of, you can't see all the wonderful people that were there too, but I happen to be the one who stuck the stuff on the door when we had a protest there. What we stuck on the door was a copy of the treaty, which is the blue, and this sign that says this corporation is engaged in activities prohibited by the treaty. And there was the yellow sheet, explains why they're breaking the law there. And then what really cracked us up is when we noticed that just above my hand there, it says notice, no weapons allowed on the premises. So we found that entertaining. So when I went to the Deterrence Summit, some friends of mine that were distributing, some mysterious people, I don't know who they were. They were distributing this pamphlet. I don't know who they were, really. And it said, and it talked about the reputational risk. You have to imagine this is a trifold, professional-looking little pamphlet, right? So welcome to the Deterrence Summit. What's next? Let's talk about reputational risk. And let's talk about legislative and regulatory risk. And let's talk about divestment. And we're saying stay ahead of the curve. To protect jobs, income, your company, your family, your world. It's time to work with the federal government to convert funds, scientific expertise, and infrastructure to safe, sustainable, genuine climate solutions like solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, and reforestation. So this was this helpful pamphlet that was quickly confiscated, but that was fun. Okay, so national action. Here's Eleanor Holmes Norton and her bill. That is not going to pass anytime in the foreseeable future, but boy, can it ignite some conversations that we really need to be having. Are you in support of getting rid of nuclear weapons or not? And what I love about it is that it talks about converting, just like we said, warheads to windmills, converting the jobs, the money, the infrastructure, converting all that to green solutions. So it's worth supporting. HRES 77 isn't on here. That has got more co-sponsors now than this one does, but that's partly because it's easier. It's just a resolution, it's not a bill, and it's not calling for as much. It says to embrace the goals and provisions of the treaty, whereas this one says to actually sign the treaty, but that still can be useful in some circles. The Green New Deal resolution, the Earth Bill, these are hopeful things that are in Congress and can be supported. And what we've done is we've gone to the people who've signed the 77 and the Green New Deal and the Earth Bill, and we've gone and we said, okay, can you take the next step? When we go to Congress, we say, can you also, do this one? State action, there's details on different state actions in the booklet. In Massachusetts, we have a commission bill. All we're doing is trying to form a commission to talk about what can this Commonwealth of Massachusetts do about climate and nuclear danger. How are we contributing to it? How could we suffer from it? What can we do about it? It's just a commission, and we've had been working on it for like 5 years, and it takes like 7 years to get anything through the Massachusetts State House as average, is what we've heard. So we're getting there, and we have a lot of people working on it. But that's in the works, and that's exciting, and that's a model for other states as well, because with a commission, then you can gather a lot of information and make informed recommendations to policymakers. So that's one thing you can do at the state level. And at the city and town level, the green dots are those who are divesting from fossil fuels. The blue dots are the places that are divesting only from nuclear weapons, like New York City, Berkeley, Oakland, Spokane, and Corvallis in Chicago. That's and Tacoma Park, Maryland, which is kind of it. You can see that the fossil fuel divestment movement is really humming along, and that's great. We need to. The nuclear side needs to catch up with that. But I consider myself on both sides. So this movie has been raising awareness. The Oppenheimer movie. How many people have seen it? Okay, so how'd you feel at the end of it? Somebody? What's that? What'd you say? Mm-hmm. Yeah, took me 3 days, then I had to go see Barbie. Yeah. So did you think that it raised awareness of the danger in a country that doesn't think about it very much? You didn't think it raised awareness? Okay. Yes? Yep. Right. Yep. Mhm. Yeah, we don't have to have these. So this is an article. I published an article in Presenza, and also it's on our website, nuclearban.us, under opinion. This article, Zero Would Be Nice. If you saw the movie, you know that, or even if you saw the trailer, you know that zero would be nice. They were talking about the minuscule chance that setting off the Trinity test could ignite the atmosphere of the entire planet. And they were saying, you know, there's a slightly non-zero chance that it could go badly that way. And there's a line in the movie, well, you know, can you give me zero chance? Zero would be nice, you know. And I'm saying nuclear weapons, zero would be beyond nice. We can safely abolish nuclear weapons, so from the whole planet. So that's the point. I want to share some really good news with you. You're the first to hear this. I just got this news last night. Okay, there's this guy named Kai Bird, and he wrote American Prometheus. He was a co-author. The other author has since passed away. Has anybody read American Prometheus? It's 720 pages. Okay, if you haven't read it, I forgive you. It's big. Handy for ballast. But it's a good book, and it describes in great detail the story of Oppenheimer and the birth of the nuclear weapon. So I started reaching out to him. I found an email for him and started reaching out months ago and saying, you know, would you speak out about abolishing nuclear weapons? And he said, oh, I'm not doing nuclear weapon stuff now. And I said, well, and then I noticed that he had started getting interviewed a lot about the movie. So I said, well, how about now? You know, and so we went back and forth a lot, and I noticed that he had co-sponsored a bill not co-sponsored, but endorsed a bill from Senator Markey in Massachusetts to keep artificial intelligence's finger off the button, which is a good idea. It turns out that's already the law, so we didn't really need that. It was a good, nice, sounded nice politically. But I said, well, if you're willing to endorse that, can you endorse the Norton bill, which is about getting rid of the button itself? You know, nobody should have the button, AI or anybody, you know, you know. And he said yes. And it came through last night. And yeah. So I'm just putting together a press release that Eleanor Holmes Norton's office is going to put out that says, you know, Oppenheimer author endorses nuclear abolition bill. So I'm just tickled pink about that right now. So you'll be hearing about that. So we were talking about, you know, what's going to work, what's going to be powerful. So this is a dove of peace that has a dream of a world without nuclear weapons and fossil fuels. And now that we have the treaty, we say this is a dove with teeth, a dove that, you know, has the treaties, divestment, boycotts, laws, stigmatizations, and a mass movement. You know, we don't have a mass movement yet on the nuclear side anyway, but this is what we want, a dove with teeth. Does that scare you, or does it make you laugh? Yeah, a little scary. Okay, so the Warheads to Windmills Coalition, as I said, is it includes Code Pink and WILPF and World Beyond War and a lot of other great organizations, Green Parties, and a number of climate action groups as well. We need more organizations to join this coalition. And what the coalition will do, and you might make joint statements or do joint divestment campaigns or whatever, but at least at the beginning, it's to get tools into the hands of the members of those organizations to pressure Congress. So, and we'll be doing, you know, more. So it's not about the coalition, you know, being the star of the show. It's about empowering all those organizations. And So this is the list of members so far. So that's what we're asking for. No nukes, no fossil fuels, no brainer. That was easy. Also known as feeding two birds with one stone. I'm glad you like that. So this is the summary of the book. The book itself will be coming out soon. What else did I want to tell you? Oh, more good news. There is a meeting of the 68 countries that have ratified the treaty, the meeting of states parties to the treaty, it's called. Last year, it happened in Vienna, and Tim was there, and I was here. I was actually in front of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. with 5 members of Congress talking about nuclear abolition, and we live streamed that to Vienna so they could see that not all American politicians want to blow up the world, and it was beautiful. And there's a short video of them speaking that I might be able to show you if we have time. If we don't have time, it's on our website, nuclearban.us. It's the first thing you'll see. And that makes me feel hopeful to hear Ilhan Omar, Jim McGovern, Eleanor Holmes Norton, Don Beyer, Earl Blumenauer, and also Rashida Tlaib. We had other footage we added to that. They're all saying we have to abolish nuclear weapons. We have to convert the resources to climate solutions. And I find that cheerful. So what you can do, I mean, you have, we talked about the political actions that you can do. You can ask your members of Congress to take. So specifically, Vermonters, get Becca Balint to co-sponsor the Norton bill. I mean, if everybody here were to talk to her about that or show up in person, hey, anybody want to organize that? Raise your hand if you want to organize that, Vermonters. Let's do it. Isaac and Robin raised your hand a little bit. Isaac, you're on. Fantastic. Okay, so these are the people. Yay. Thank you, Isaac. Great. Likewise, Peter Welch and Bernie Sanders could introduce a companion bill in the Senate, as could any other senator, obviously, but they're not doing that. Peter Welch is interesting because he did co-sponsor the Norton bill when he was in the House. So he is on our team, but he's not been that bold in the Senate. Tim, he did co-sponsor 77, right? Peter Welch?
No.
He didn't? Okay. So if all of these people in this room showed up at Peter Welch's office and asked him to create a companion bill in the Senate, nuclear abolition and climate conversion bill, how exciting would that be? Anybody want to organize that? Balint, Welch, and Bernie. Okay, so those are 2 different things. So Balint to co-sponsor in the House, Welch and Bernie to introduce a companion bill in the Senate and get some co-sponsors on that side. And you also have in your book, People Over Pentagon, HR 1134. Every little bit counts. And don't think that what you do doesn't matter, because it does. Okay? It does. There is hope. So how is our time? How much time do we have left? Till 12? Great. Okay, so the video is like 4 minutes if you want to see the members of Congress. And then we could have Q&A or the other way around. Anybody have a preference? Tim, do you have a preference? Film first? Somebody said film first. Okay, Tim, hang on. You're a lovely presence here. Okay, let me just figure out how to get this. Well, yes. Tim, why don't you add whatever I missed, please, and whatever you want to say.
You did a great job. I don't think you missed anything.
Oh, thanks. Nope, okay.
For the sake of all people around the world, we must end the existence of nuclear weapons on this planet before nuclear weapons end the existence of human life on this planet.
It is my honor to be with all of you and speak in support of the I CAN Pledge and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
Right now, the threat of nuclear war has become more real this year than it has been for previous decades. The complete elimination of nuclear weapons is the only solution for a safer and more peaceful world. That's why I'm proud to join the call for the United States to join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons alongside more than 120 countries.
Regrettably, the United States is not party to this treaty. Regrettably, none of the major nuclear powers is party to the treaty. As the world also races toward a climate catastrophe, we can't continue to build weapons that could trigger in an instant a climate catastrophe of unimaginable magnitude.
Conventional war could turn into a nuclear war, whether it's intentionally or miscalculation or even by accident. We have to be frightened. We have to be committed to action. We should do everything we can, and signing the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons would be a great way to start.
The United States is the only nation that has used nuclear weapons in war and possesses one of the largest nuclear weapon arsenals.
These are weapons that we can't afford and we can't afford to use. It's going to be over $1 trillion in the modernization of the next 30 years.
That could be invested in providing healthcare, clean water, quality education to every single neighbor across our country.
At a time when we are desperate to be able to deal with the consequences of the pandemic, this is lunacy.
Now, there are those who point to the invasion of Ukraine as a reason to call for a new arms race. I believe we must race in a different direction. Negotiations to reduce, disarm, and ultimately eliminate nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons are the most catastrophic, dangerous weapons ever created. These weapons cause widespread humanitarian and environmental damage, impacting everyone regardless of the target.
And let me be clear. While there are some who argue that nuclear weapons have kept the peace since the end of World War II, that is simply a lie.
My bill provides that the funds used for nuclear weapons in the United States be redirected to human and infrastructure needs, housing, healthcare, Social Security, restoring the environment, and creating carbon-free, nuclear-free energy.
I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton's bill to abolish nuclear weapons and increase investments in our economy and energy alternatives.
My bill would help the United States reestablish its moral leadership in the world.
Inclusive foreign policy centers human rights, justice, and peace as the pillars of America's engagement around the world, including the elimination of nuclear weapons. I know a better world without nuclear weapons and never-ending wars is possible.
That is why I call for divesting from war and violence and instead investing in healthcare, our environment, our communities, and our people.
You. So let's see, stop share. So if you go to nuclearban.us and you watch that video, just below it says citizen action. Click that, there's a bunch of stuff. There we go. Hi, Tim.
Hello.
Okay, questions? Yes, Isaac. Oh, yes, I can pin him, right? Ah, thank you so much. Yeah, that was a good question. Okay. So there he is. Questions? Yes? Absolutely. I was kind of excited to see Isaac here. Yeah. Yeah, Tim, would you like to address that?
I can't hear the questions from the audience.
I'm sorry. The question was, how do we get young people involved? Because everybody in this room, you can't see them, but they're mature. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
lusciously mature.
You've mentioned ICANN several times, and you may have said that this is mostly a movement of young people globally. It's not the case here in the U.S., but globally, it's all young people who are involved in the anti-nuclear weapons movement, which is very exciting and gives us a lot of hope and energy to work on it here. It is mostly older people here, which is fair to say, but the climate movement is much more oriented towards young people, and that's one of the main reasons we're building this coalition with the climate movement, because we need to work together with them. I think a lot of the young people in the climate movement also recognize that they need and want to work with older people who've had the experience of working on nuclear issues over many decades and have a different perspective and have something to offer. And I think we can create an intergenerational movement out of this, and that's what we're trying to do.
Thanks. Robin.
Yeah, well, I have a question for Yemen because we here in Vermont have a member of the Plowshares, which is the group that goes and pours blood on nuclear missiles and warheads and so on. And I'm wondering about where you lived in England. You were next to where the Trident submarines are, and is there a similar movement in England against those? Could you describe why those submarines with those Trident missiles on them are so incredibly horrible? Okay.
And what movements are there around the world?
Sure. I mean, I don't know about pouring blood. That's kind of an American thing, but there's certainly Plowshares movement in England and in Germany and other countries, and there are people protesting and getting arrested and doing all kinds of things. The submarines that you're talking about, the Trident submarines, just one submarine can destroy the entire planet. It's got more nuclear weapons on board than all the weapons dropped in World War II, including Hiroshima and Nagasaki, on one submarine. The U.S. has 14 of these submarines. Britain has 4 of them, and they're planet-destroying machines. I mean, it's just utterly ludicrous that these exist at all. And there's been lots of protests over many years. As you may know, these submarines are based in Scotland. These are the UK's nuclear weapons. They're based in Scotland. The vast majority of people in Scotland don't want them. The Scottish government wants them. Almost every single member of the Scottish Parliament has joined the ICANN pledge, saying that they don't want these weapons and they want Scotland to sign the treaty. But Scotland is at the moment part of the UK and doesn't have a say in that. They may well vote to change that anytime soon, and that will be the end of UK's nuclear weapons, because amazingly, there's no other place to put them except in Georgia. So the UK Scotland becomes independent and boots out the nuclear submarines. Britain would have to store their own submarines in the US, which is kind of weird and ironic. But anyway, there are certain movements, as Vicky said. The movement against nuclear weapons is much stronger in many other parts of the world than it is here at the moment. I mean, it was strong here in the 1980s, in the 1950s and 60s. There's been periods of time, and I hope it will come back again here. But there are protests and demonstrations and actions and people being arrested at bases and blockading and all kinds of things. People have got onto submarines and and thrown computers overboard and all kinds of fun things. But here, the penalties are higher, and as you mentioned, the plowshares actions like the one in Georgia at that nuclear submarine base, they all got 2 years or more in prison. So it's more difficult to take that kind of action, but that doesn't mean we can't do other things. And there's plenty of things that we can do in this country to raise the profile and put pressure on this whole industry.
Thanks, Tim. You had a question? Yes.
One thing that everybody in Vermont cares about peace.
Do you want to come up here so that Tim can hear you too? That'd be awesome.
Or you can just repeat the question.
Everybody in Vermont who cares about peace has three things in common: Bernie Sanders, Peter Welch, and Becca Berlin. And it's one thread that is going through the day is those three people not doing things that people who care about peace in Vermont want. Isaac talked about the petition that Action Corps of Vermont brought to Bernie and Brattleboro on Thursday, which had 4 demands: 2 on Yemen, 1 on Ukraine cluster bombs, and 1 on human rights in Israel. Medea and I were talking before the thing started about how Bernie hasn't done anything on Ukraine. And I assume everybody here knows, we all have, every American, I live in Amherst, so Jim McGovern is my rep. We all have a responsibility to push on our representatives in Congress. But the Vermont congressional delegation is extremely special in the context of the United States. Like, it was Bernie who did the Yemen War Powers Resolution. So him not doing that is holding everything back because other senators defer to the senator who led before. So one thing that my question, my concern, my issue is, could we have a common program on pushing these members of Congress? Medea told me, I don't know if I'm telling tales out of school, you're talking about maybe doing a sit-in at Bernie's office in Washington. We've done 2 actions on Bernie in the last while. We went to the thing in Stowe and complained that he's refusing to meet with people in Vermont who care about Yemen. Then we did the state in the town hall on Thursday. So it'd be great if before we leave today, we have some common plan for this thing that we have in common, which is the Vermont congressional delegation not leading on our stuff.
That's great.
How do you say the last name of Becca? Ballant. So Becca Ballant is in Israel right now on a delegation with Hakeem Jeffries. And, this is an AIPAC delegation to see what AIPAC wants you to see. So she needs to be contacted by as many people as possible in the next week to say, there are things you didn't see, and we want you to talk about Palestinian rights.
Do we have time for one more question for Tim? Oh, there's one in the back. Yes.
Thank you for all your good ideas and suggestions. And I just wanted to add, you mentioned that nuclear power might be a good transition kind of energy.
Maybe, maybe not. She's talking about nuclear power and transition.
Not at all. But your windmills idea, we need more solar power and windmills where it's, feasible. But it's nuclear power has to be stopped.
Yeah.
And it ties right in, as I think you mentioned, with nuclear weapons for supplying materials, which is why it was started in the first place. Right. So I just wanted to add that, and thanks for what you're saying.
Yeah, she was just adding that nuclear power has got to go.
Yes.
We all agree. I agree. Yes?
I just want to make one point, and that would be, we think about getting rid of nuclear power and replacing it with other engineered solutions. One of the things that we could really do, which would make a huge difference, is take a look at the natural world right now and go back to Roman architecture, go back to some of the earlier architecture, where buildings were built to accommodate us in the weather, so that we don't need. So there's so many other solutions because the technology for solar is decimating so many parts of the world as companies go into mining for lithium and cobalt and all of those other minerals. So I would love to have people turn their attention to what our natural world is already giving us and how we can respect that and use it for that. I mean, without destruction.
Thanks. She was saying that solar and wind and other things do have downsides environmentally, and encouraging us to go back to forms of architecture that work with the climate. You know, like our ancestors did. Did I capture it?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, question.
I have been sort of aware, maybe I'm wrong, this is why I'm hesitating to ask this. It seems to me that much of the green forces, particularly maybe in Europe, are turning to nuclear power as an alternative energy also. I see the two connected, the abolition of nuclear weapons and the abolition of nuclear power. And I think it's a link that should be made more forcefully. My question is it correct to say that many of the so-called green, even parties, are saying that nuclear power could be an alternative to fossil fuels? Is that happening?
She was asking if the green campaigners are, if some of them are supporting nuclear power.
Yeah.
So some people in the room are saying, yes, they are, green
Yeah,
people are
certainly. I mean,
nuclear power.
In the environmental movement as well as in the peace movement, there are people that think nuclear power is a good thing, and there are also people who think the Ukraine war is a good thing, and they're wrong. And we have to educate them, and we have to work together and help people understand these issues. Those are the two big challenges that we have in building a coalition, because there are big differences. But the nuclear power issue is becoming more and more clear to people who are following. I mean, if you're following what's going on in Ukraine with Zaporizhia, nuclear power plants, apart from anything else, are ticking time bombs in a potential war situation. And even the United States isn't immune from the threat of attacks on nuclear power stations. So the idea of building more and more of them and putting them in all over the world is just totally crazy. And as Vicky said, the first nuclear power plant coming online in 30 years is just opened in Georgia. It didn't just take 30 years; it took billions and billions more than they said it would cost. And the cost alone is just out of the scale of what we need to be doing right now. I mean, nuclear power is just a non-solution, and we have to work with people on that. And but as with all these issues, there are different opinions and different approaches, and organizations take a stand, and it's very hard to work around that. I mean, we have plenty of peace organizations who don't think we can get rid of nuclear weapons or end the war in Ukraine. I mean, they're peace organizations, and they're still thinking we've got to, sort of do little bits here and there around the edges and carry on as we are. And we've got to all work together on that. And I hope you people here up there in Vermont are going to lead the way, because, you do have some members in Congress who could be speaking out more on these things. We've got Jim McGovern down here, but we've also got lots of other people in Massachusetts who are not speaking out. We just got to keep working at it.
Yes. Do we have time for more questions? I'm sorry, well, I'll be around.
I just want to say that all those nice politicians that you saw in the video all voted to send weapons to Ukraine. And, well, that breaks my heart, but that's a segue just to make sure that you listen to every single word that Medea Benjamin has to say later in the day. You have an urgent question right there.
It's really important that we make that connection when we're talking about getting rid of nuclear weapons, that you say nuclear weapons and power, that you don't, that you continue to connect them. Right. Peter Welch has not come out against nuclear power.
None of them
Neither has Bill McKibben ever said anything against nuclear power. We need to talk to these people. We need to ask them to be stalwarts and to speak up because they're cowards. And Becca Bell is probably amongst them as well. So I just want to say that make the connection. Don't forget to say nuclear power.
Thank you.
Yeah, excuse me, I just want to add that historically, I mean, it's historically an important landmark. Like war and nuclear power are intersecting in the Sahel region. There's a war over there for minerals and other, potential resources that are fueling war. So I'm very pleased to see that here they are anti-war people, because this fight cannot go forward without being clearly anti-war. War is fueling, the new scramble for Africa. So, and then Niger is a huge reservoir of uranium. So it goes also to the capitalism system that is maintaining Niger as a middle age by the, sometimes both in the mind and the way they live, and then France, that beautiful country that, my friends, my progressive friends in the US think that it's still, la patrie, les droits de l'homme. France is maintaining Niger and Nigerians, Ivorians, Togolese, Senegalese, Burkina Faso, the past colonial, domination that is fueling the democratic decay. So that fight is holistic. And that's why I'm looking forward to seeing Bernie Sanders, the people from here, to clearly be against imperialism.
Here's one of our young people.
This is Eric Amanra. He's living in Burlington now from the Ivory Coast, and I talked to him during lunch hour if you have other questions about what's happening in Africa at this time. So I think we have to end the Q&A, whatever this is. And there's incredible food there. So we have like half an hour or maybe 40 minutes to eat, and then we will invite Medea to come to the platform.
And please come on over and sign the petition to ban nuclear weapons.
Thank you, Tim.
Many of you may have already signed.
Bye-bye.
Sign again.
Okay.
And I just wanted to mention that one of the things maybe people underestimate about the younger generations is that how much we love you. We love our elders. We cherish you. You matter to us. You're our role models. We want to be there for you. And you are just, everyone in the room is just a love. So I just want to say I love you. And I think we all love each other. So just remember how much we love you. Thank you.
So again, at the moment I would ask folks to quiet your voices and please give your attention to James, or Jamie, listed in the program as James, who is going to read 2 pieces of poetry concerning the topic of the day. So I would just ask that folks be mindful of your voices. Folks, be mindful of your voices as we listen to this poetical reading. Thank you.
That's an apt description. Thank you, Duncan. Yes, I can, and maybe I can squat too, or I'll lift it if I can. I don't know if I can or not. And then I think we can just turn it. There. How's that? Great. Thanks, everyone. It's just such a huge honor to be here. Medea Benjamin is somebody I've been aware of for a lot of years. I grew up in this town in the summers. My father in the 60s and 70s built a little 9-hole course down the road, and the town was very different in the 70s and 80s, and it's just so heartening to see everybody here trying to celebrate peace, and I'm really appreciative of that very much. I've been an anti-war writer for as long as I could write creatively. It's kind of where my energy goes. So I thought I'd read a poem, a longer poem that I wrote. I started 6 months before the Iraq War started on a bus on the way to a protest to DC in October 2002 about that war. Not much has really changed, unfortunately, but this group will help change everything. It's called Safe Passage. In the clipped half-light between the highway and glass, I met death yet again. Yet again, as though I'd always met death right here on this bus. Always this night with the still moon on the wane over Wellstone and other historical ghosts only recently passed. All of them moving through us on this slow roll to Washington to meet democracy by morning. I'll say this, I haven't missed this rain, or I've forgotten now what it could possibly mean. Weak-kneed, slack-jawed, my neck a burnt piece of sausage, the slap-slap of wipers against the windshield. It's just that now, upon waking, it feels different. This dream, this death, feels better than I ever remembered it. It feels like this night, surrounded by friends whose names I don't know, but whose cores I imagine my own core to be, without malice, laid open clean, the way humans can be when they're able to choose. But there was this also, lust, a going in and coming out but bloodless, a kind of throughway like this road to the Potomac, further among the children of the ghost dance who pass in their red-yellow bus, further among the fear in the suburbs, and yet that fear fades because we make it fade. We are all, after all, in death as in life, waltzing the rain. We are dancing with ghosts. I'll say this, I would die for my country. I would die for my country if it would live up to me. And because that was kind of a serious poem, I wanted to read another poem that was a little less serious, but same ideas here. And it's based on this great performance art piece that Yoko Ono has done over the years, many, many years, called Cut Piece. that she pioneered, 50 or more years ago. And the name of the poem is called Cut Piece. Yoko Ono cut naked in the whelp of Japan, then decades later on the banks of the Seine. So much love endowed by the revealing of ego, birthmark, palm scars, obsidian gaze trained out the open box window. Too much love? Never too much.
And I learned some things about Ukraine. So I'm very, very grateful that Medea is here, but also that she and Mr. Davies co-wrote this book, because we're finding the sadness of our country is our ignorance about the world. And so thank you, Medea, and thank Code Pink, and thank you for hoisting yourself in front of Anthony Blinken and saying, do your job, Blinken. So thank you, and that's all I have to say, because I wasn't prepared. Welcome.
Well, I like that very short introduction, and for those who don't know what you're referring to, we at Code Pink like to go to these congressional hearings when we can, and this one was about diplomacy for 2023, and it featured the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, who is supposed to be our #1 diplomat, right? So he gets up and he's talking about war and all the things, we're doing to support war. And so I popped up with a sign that said Peace Talks Now, probably one of these ones here, and said, you're supposed to be a diplomat, do your job. If we don't want another endless war. If you don't like the Chinese peace plan, where is your peace plan? At which point I got arrested. But it's very sad that you get arrested for asking the top diplomat what is his peace plan. And it's very sad that this issue of Ukraine has so divided what was a peace movement. Raise your hand if you have friends who you're kind of flabbergasted about their position on Ukraine. Yeah. I mean, I have friends who grew up as Quakers, continue to be Quakers all their life, and say, this one is different. And while we were just talking, I got an urgent message from somebody where we're going to be in 2 days in Belfast, Maine to speak at the Unitarian Church. And it was that the pastor was considering canceling because she got a complaint from a Ukrainian American, and she sent me a copy of the complaint. How dare this woman, who is not Ukrainian American, and by the way, I do have ethnic roots in Ukraine, which is neither here or there, because anybody could talk about Ukraine, right? How dare this woman, who is a Putin apologist, be invited to your peace church to talk about Ukraine, that you must cancel this. And I have had this, unfortunately, in universities, in bookstores, in peace churches, where they have given in to expressions that are totally undemocratic by people who claim to be fighting for the Ukrainians' right to democracy. And I think it is very, very sad that in a number of these places, they have canceled the talks. And I say to them, since when did calling for peace become so dangerous? And since when did wanting to end the suffering of the Ukrainian people become anti-Ukraine? And since when did condemning Russia's outrageous invasion of Ukraine, but wanting to see an end to it become equivalent for a Putin apologist. Things are so upside down, insane. What is happening in Ukraine, and let's put the blame on Russia. Let's say that if many of us, I think, in this room were living in Russia, we would probably be in prison right now protesting that invasion, right? But we live here in the United States. And so our job is to look at what our country does to lay the context, if not directly invade other countries ourselves, like we've done so many times in our history, then provoke other invasions, as is this case. And so you can call the Russian invasion unjustified, and I do, but you cannot call it unprovoked. You must recognize the history of provocations of the United States, and let's just go back to the breakup of the Soviet Union, 1991, when the Secretary of State, James Baker, said directly to Gorbachev, "We will not move 1 inch eastward in NATO," and then went on to violate that in administration after administration, whether it was a Democrat or Republican administration, moving closer and closer, surrounding Russia. And imagine if that were something that was done to us in the United States. I mean, just imagine if it was whether Mexico or Canada, if there was a very hostile U.S. military alliance that had shown itself in places from Kosovo to Afghanistan to Libya, invading other countries, that hostile military alliance right on our borders, what would the U.S. do? What it has done time and time again, which is invade and overthrow governments. Let's recognize that we are now commemorating the 200th anniversary of the Monroe Doctrine, where the U.S. has said that all of Latin America is our backyard and we can go in and overthrow governments at our will. And you might not like it, but Russia is an important power, and it has its own national security interests, that it wants to secure its borders and doesn't want Ukraine to be a member of a hostile military alliance, i.e. NATO, and has said it over and over and over again. And so have U.S. diplomats, including the person who is now the head of the CIA in the United States, William Burns, who, when he was ambassador to Russia back in 2008, said very clearly, do not do this because it will create tremendous instability in the region, divide Ukraine between those who are pro-West and those who are pro-Soviet at that time, and the Soviets will be forced to respond. The Russians will be forced to respond, something they would not like to do. That was said many, many years ago by a person in the know because he was living in Russia at that time. And so we were warned over and over and over again, violated over and over again. And not only that, the level of U.S. interference in the affairs of Ukraine has been astounding. You know, we just went through years and years of Russiagate, which then laid the groundwork, especially in the Democratic Party, for people hating Russia. And there was really nothing to it. But yet, the U.S. involvement in the internal affairs of Ukraine are so blatant. From the fact you get the war hawk Victoria Nuland, who God knows how she manages to keep her positions in the State Department, whether it's a Democrat or Republican administration, and bragged back in 2013 how we had spent billions of dollars in Ukraine building up civil society, pro-Western civil society, which really means anti-Russian civil society. And where Victoria Nuland herself is on a leaked audio tape talking to the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine saying let's decide in this Maidan uprising who is going to be the new head of state. Come on. And is there when the uprising is happening, giving out goodies to people and saying, good job, go in and overthrow your democratically elected government. What if there were a Russian official on January 6th in front of the Congress who is giving out cookies and saying, good job, go in there and overthrow the government? So we have to look at the tremendous implications of our government in this conflict and recognize that this conflict is one that didn't start when the Russians invaded, that it started a long time back. And when there were efforts to try to solve the problem, when the Maidan uprising happened and it turned into a coup taken over by military right-wing elements, and the Donbas region broke away and the Russians came in and took back Crimea, part of a region that they had occupied. They belonged to Russia for 200 years. There was an effort by the international community to say, we must stop this, and that's why the Minsk Accords were signed. And yet, lo and behold, they were never implemented. And part of the reason is the ones who were supposed to guarantee that, the French and the Germans, recently came out, the heads of state at that time, and said, well, we really never meant that as a peace agreement. We meant that to buy time so that we could arm Ukraine to be ready to take back those regions militarily. And indeed, that's what happened immediately. The U.S. sending weapons in, first only defensive weapons under Obama, then Trump came in and lifted that, started sending in offensive weapons and training the Ukrainian military, 10,000 people at a time, to be ready to fight Russia. And so the Russian invasion, once again, something that we must say is illegal according to international law, is brutal. I was just in Ukraine seeing the results firsthand of that invasion, talking to people who had lost their loved ones, seeing the children laying the wreaths of flowers on the gravestones of their fathers that they would never see again. We want to stop this war because we want to stop the suffering that is going on there every single day. And we also know that this is not a winnable war, even though when I was in Ukraine, people were saying, we want to keep on fighting because we want to win. When I would speak to them in private and ask them, do you think you can really take back Crimea? They said, it's something we're not allowed to talk about. And if you look at the Pentagon papers that were leaked a couple of months back, they talked about how this is not a winnable war, that no matter what happens in the counteroffensive that was supposed to happen in the spring and then was postponed until the summer and now has been going on for almost 2 months without any kind of success, it's said in those papers that the Ukrainians will not be able to gain back any significant territory to change the situation on the ground. And we also have former generals, including one that was the advisor to Angela Merkel in Germany, who said that if the Western powers really work with Ukraine to try to take back Crimea, there is a tremendous likelihood that the Russians would use a nuclear weapon. They are not going to give up Crimea. And so we have a situation where this war is could very easily go beyond the borders of Ukraine. We've had 2 instances, one with a stray missile that landed in Poland, and one just a couple of days ago with a drone attack that was right on the border of Romania, that those could have ended up to be a call to say, there is a NATO country that's been attacked, now let's implement Article 5. Article 5 of NATO is an injury to one country, and NATO is an injury to all. We have to start getting involved, send in our troops. And this is something that Zelensky is really aiming for, because he wants Western troops to get involved. And this is something that Biden has been very, very reluctant to do. And that's why he has been reluctant to cross these lines over and over again, because he doesn't want to antagonize Russia so much that Russia will start directly attacking U.S. troops that are in all of these bases that are surrounding Russia in the region, including right in Poland and Romania. So he has said at one time, we're not going to send HIMARS, then he sent HIMARS, we're not going to send Patriot missiles, and then send Patriot missiles. We're not going to send tanks, and then sending tanks. Now they are going to be putting in F-16s. And then this issue of cluster munitions. Cluster munitions. Come on, this is a weapon that the international community has come together and said it is so heinous that we want to ban this weapon, a weapon that releases these small bombs that then are left in the fields for farmers to pick up a decade later and get their legs blown off. Children who see these shiny things and pick them up and get blown to pieces. And that's why there are over 120 countries that have signed that ban. And yet, here comes Biden and says, well, after having criticized the Russians for using cluster munitions, and the Ukrainians were using cluster munitions, sends in way more cluster munitions than were used by either side. So we have a situation that is taking us to the brink of a World War III or a nuclear confrontation. And yet you still have people who say, we can't talk to the Russians. Well, I think there are a couple of ways that we have to respond to that. One is, let's try. And that's why we have a sign over here that says Biden talked to Putin, because in all of this time, Biden has not tried to talk to Putin. Couldn't he pick up the phone? I mean, this is something that Donald Trump says he would do if he were elected, and before he even got to the White House, he would pick up the phone and talk to his two friends, Zelensky and Putin. And when he says it, the crowd roars because they like that idea. You talk to your adversaries. You don't have to negotiate with your friends, you negotiate with the people you don't like. And there have been talks going on a number of issues. In fact, there were talks just 1 month into the invasion when all of the literature says that is the most propitious time to try to end a war before the two sides have really hardened. And the international community got involved. Everyone from, ironically, the Prime Minister of Israel at that time. I say ironically because there's a conflict at home he could try to solve. But also the president of Turkey, Erdogan, and others said, okay, we've got to start these talks right away. And they did. And guess what? They were making tremendous gains. In fact, there was a 12-point peace plan that said Ukraine will be a neutral country and will not join NATO, but it will have guarantees by powerful countries that this will not happen again. Russian troops will leave. There will be a referendum in the Donbass, and the issue of Crimea will be put off into the future. I mean, this was on the table, and both sides were accepting it until Boris Johnson from the UK, who was head of the UK at that time, came in and said, to Zelensky, we do not want you to negotiate with Zelensky. We want you to fight till victory, and we will be there with you till the end. And then we have Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, who, by the way, came to us directly from the board of Raytheon, who came and said, we need to use this to weaken Russia. And the US has been using this now as a way to, quote, weaken Russia. And as some of our senators have said, what a great investment. We don't even have to invest any of our soldiers. We can just pay the bills. And in terms of other attempts at peace talks, well, there have been talks between Ukraine and Russia about the getting the International Atomic Energy Association agency into the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, because Both sides have been shelling the area around the plant, extremely dangerous for anybody who cares about the environment. And there were negotiations to get the IAEA into that plant. There have been negotiations that you probably heard about called the grain deal to try to make sure that grain was able to get out of Ukraine so that the steep increase in price of grain after the Russian invasion could be eased. And that deal was successful for quite a while until recently the Russians pulled out. They said that the Ukrainians and the international community had not fulfilled their side of the deal, which is that Russia would be able to get its grain and its fertilizers out as well. And the sanctions that were on the Russian banks that made it difficult for them to do these transactions would be lifted. And they said that that never happened. So unfortunately, that deal is now put on hold. We're hoping there will be more talks and that Russia will go back into that deal. There have also been talks about prisoner swaps and lots of prisoner swaps that have been happening. And there have been lots of agreements to get wounded soldiers back across the borders, to get the bodies of fallen soldiers back. So these are examples of talks that have been happening. And between the US and Russia, it's interesting that there were reports in the media recently on what has been called Track 2 talks. And that really means sort of citizen to citizen talks between US and Russian citizens, but at a very high level. People from the Council on Foreign Affairs, people from think tanks, many of them funded by the weapons industry, but we won't go into that right now, talking to their counterparts in academia and other areas on the Russian side. But what's so interesting about those talks is that they've been characterized as not track 2, but track 1.5, because there have been officials involved in it. There have been briefings at the White House about these talks, and at one of the talks, the foreign minister of Russia met with them. So there have been some exchanges. And you know why? Because people are so worried about where this conflict could be going. In fact, Jan Stoltenberg, who's the head of NATO and very hawkish, had said this can spiral out of control. And if it does, this will be a huge disaster. So in the meantime, there have been efforts by many people in the international community to say, well, we can't just talk about the Zaporizhia plant and grain and prisoner swaps. We have to go back to the issue of how are we going to stop this war. And these peace talks have been done by Pope Francis, who has designated a very high-level envoy who has years and years of experience with negotiations. There have been efforts by the African countries who say, this doesn't just affect Europe, this affects the entire world. And in fact, many African countries have seen an increase in hunger because of the increase in the price of food. And many places around the world have seen an increase in poverty because of the increase in the price of energy. So 6 African nations headed by South Africa have been visiting both countries to try to push towards peace talks. There was an effort just last week, which I find kind of ironic on a couple of levels, and that is one that was hosted by, exactly, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, one of the most oppressive, repressive governments in the world, hosted by the Crown Prince MBS, who is known for having chopped up the body of a journalist for the Washington Post, Jamal Khashoggi, and who at one time Biden, when he was campaigning, said should be treated as a pariah. Anyway, he hosted these peace talks, which the US was very excited to be part of, invited nations from all over. And how it was reported in the US press is that Russia didn't even show up to these peace talks. Can you believe it? Russia wasn't invited to the peace talks. And I put peace talks in quotes because how can you have peace talks where Russia is not invited to the table? So we need to get real about moving. What can we do? And we don't have a lot of access to the White House unless somebody here does, and I would love to talk to you privately about that afterwards. But we are supposed to be represented by the people in Congress. And I think it is great that you have the numbers on the back of here of Bernie Sanders, Peter Welch, and Becca Balint. And I think it is so important that we do more on this issue as well as the issues of Yemen and nuclear weapons and many other things. But on this issue of Ukraine, what is happening in Congress is just unconscionable. Unconscionable. To think that after there was one attempt, a very, very mild attempt by 30 members of the Progressive Caucus of the Democrats in the House last October to say, not say we don't want to send any more weapons. They say, in addition to sending weapons, in addition to all the economic aid, maybe we should try negotiations as well. And it was such a bombshell. It was seen as such an affront to the Democratic Party's position that within 24 hours they were forced to withdraw that. And since then, they have been silent on this issue, but not really silent because they vote for more and more and more money for weapons for Ukraine. Every single Democrat. And then on the Republican Party, what you get for the most part is that it's another war party. Let's face it, we have two war parties. And the majority of the Republicans, when we go to these hearings and you just want to cry, is they're saying Biden is responsible for the Ukrainians not doing well enough in this counteroffensive because he has been tiptoeing into this war instead of jumping in it full force and sending more weapons and sending more money. So they want him to be even more hawkish than he is, except for this very, very tiny little, what we would call extremist right wing of the Republican Party, who has the most sane position on Ukraine. Go figure. We are looking towards Marjorie Taylor Greene to have the most sane position on Ukraine, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz. It makes no sense at all. And yet it is true. They're the ones who wanted to have an audit of where all this money is going. They're the ones who have introduced amendments to stop sending weapons. And they're the ones who have introduced a very mild amendment to the last Pentagon budget, which I thought, wow, this is a chance for the Democrats and Republicans to work together. This was an amendment introduced by a Republican congressman who is a member of the Freedom Caucus. He was an Army Ranger, a very conservative guy. His name is Warren Davidson. And he introduced an amendment that said, what is victory in Ukraine and how will it be measured? What is your diplomatic path? How much will this cost us? And we would like to get a report from you in 90 days. Now, if you were in Congress, raise your hand if you would vote for that amendment. I see almost everybody here. The others might be sleeping. But in any case, how could you be against that? Asking for a report. What is victory? We don't know what victory is. Is victory going back to the borders of 2014, i.e. getting back Crimea and all of Donbass? Is victory going back to the borders when Russia invaded, which means let Russia keep Crimea? and put the Donbass borders where it was? We don't know what victory means. Can you imagine? We spent $114 billion on this war in Ukraine, and we don't know what our administration's definition of victory is? So, it's been this small group on the right in the Republican Party that has introduced these things and voted for these things. But as the war is dragging on, more and more people are starting to vote for some of these amendments. So in the case of this amendment from Warren Davidson, there were actually 129 members of the Republican Party, which is a pretty healthy number. So how many Democrats do you think voted for it? Zero. I mean, that is disgusting, really. There is no excuse for not voting for an amendment that just says, what is your strategy? Zero, which makes you understand that this is political. And if there were a Republican in the White House, it would be totally reversed. We would have Barbara Lee with us. We would have Bernie Sanders with us. We would have the squad with us. But it's because there is a Democrat in the White House and they're being told, shut up on this issue, follow the administration on this issue. These are election times. We've got to be seen as united as a party, and we've got to be seen as strong on national security. But what is happening is that the American people, despite the one-sided, the very illusory kind of views we've been given in the media, which is victory is around the corner, we're going to send in this weapon, they're going to gain, and despite that, more and more Americans are saying, I'm not sure if I support this anymore. Americans get tired very quickly of war. So the opinion polls are showing that as time goes on, more and more Americans are definitely saying, yes, we would like to see negotiations. But you know what? They're also saying they don't want to send more weapons. The latest CNN poll said that 55% of the American people did not want to send more weapons to Ukraine. That is quite remarkable, given that that's not the message that they're hearing in the mainstream media. And so, as public opinion changes, we also have another interesting phenomena happen, which is, as an election season starts gearing up for the president, there are people coming forward in a variety of parties, both Republican. I mentioned Donald Trump, who would call his two good buddies and solve this issue right away. Ron DeSantis says that he is in favor of a ceasefire. You have Robert F. Kennedy, who, as bad as he is on issues of Israel, is very good when it comes to Ukraine and the issue of the empire as a whole. And we have Cornel West, who has a terrific position on this issue. And they are all reaching millions of people with a message that it is okay to talk about peace talks. So while some of us get pilloried going to a peace church to talk about peace, there are much more important people who have a much bigger soapbox who are out there talking about the need for a ceasefire. And this is opening up the space for us. Now, I don't know how you feel about Congress, but I think in general, they're the last ones to understand things like this. And they have to see which way the wind is blowing. And then when it finally is a gust that is taking them in the direction of a position of calling for a ceasefire, then maybe they will stick their heads out and start calling for a ceasefire. So this is where we get to the what we can do. Because I've been told by a lot of members of Congress, and I'm not sure I believe them, but because they could be just using it as an excuse, they are saying, your side, Medea, the ones calling for peace talks, are very quiet. We don't hear from them, but we hear from the other side all the time. So we've got to step up our game so they can't use that as an excuse. And I would like to ask everybody as one thing that you can do next week to please, even if you're totally cynical about this Congress, as I am, make the calls. Make a call to your congressperson, make a call to your 2 senators, because Biden has just asked for another round of money for Ukraine. And this is going to be voted on as soon as they come back in September. So make a call to your representatives and say to them, no more money for Ukraine. We want you to be calling for ceasefire and peace talks. So I want to end by looking at what other things are giving us kind of a hope in this. One is that there are more and more members of the faith-based community that are speaking out. Before the holiday season last year, we got 1,500 members of the faith-based leaders of the communities to sign a petition calling for a truce. And we just put out ads. We started with Sojourners magazine. We're going to put them in other religious papers, calling on people to support the Pope's efforts. We have people who are working with the Mayors Conference, which represents 1,300 mayors around this country. And in their last meeting, they passed a resolution saying, we have tremendous needs in our own cities to house the people without homes, to deal with the issues of lack of good health care, the infrastructure. We need this money here at home, which is why you have to work harder for a solution. It passed by all of the mayors of the cities of this country. That is very, very important. Just like Vicki and Tim are working with environmentalists to try to merge these issues about nuclear war and environment, we have been trying to get environmentalists to come out and say, we don't want nuclear winter. We don't want the blowing up of the Zaporizhia plant. We don't want all the ecocide that is happening right now with the war. But it has been very difficult to get some of the leaders of the environmental movement to work with us on this. So we have to work harder on that issue. But I think where really the impetus is coming is from outside the United States. As the war goes on, there are many, many more people in Russia who are understanding that this is not a special military, what do they call it? Operation, but indeed is a war, and more Russian soldiers dying has brought more and more Russian mothers to the fore who have in the past been on the forefront of the peace movement to stop the war in Chechnya. And they are organizing. And I think as well in Ukraine, there are more and more people in the areas most affected by the war who are saying we've had enough. And we're starting to see reporting on this in some mainstream papers like the New York Times. The Europeans who, we've been told that NATO is never stronger than it was, and actually there is a lot of truth to that, because now to see Finland and Sweden inside NATO, who ever thought we would see that, and more of the countries of Europe are putting more money into weapons. So NATO in that sense is strengthened, but inside those countries there's a lot of division because the sanctions against Russia are actually blowing back and hurting people all over Europe, hurting businesses with higher energy costs. We just came back from a meeting in Vienna, Austria. By the way, Austria being one of the few neutral countries left in Europe, the Ukrainian ambassador to Austria tried to stop us from having a meeting on peace in Ukraine in Austria, and contacted the trade union movement that was giving us their place for the meeting to tell them to pull the plug, which they did. And 2 days before the meeting, we had to scurry around and try to find another place for representatives of 32 countries to come together to talk about peace. We managed to do that, and we had an excellent gathering of people all over telling us how they're building the movement in their countries and learning from each other. And we are dedicating the end September 30th to October 8th as Global Days of Actions, and we hope that you will join us in those. There is a coalition called Peace in Ukraine. You can find it online, peaceinukraine.org, and you can join it as an individual or as an organization. and have some kind of a rally, a gathering, anything. During those days of actions, we want to show that there is a growing peace movement. In fact, I was called by the New York Times 2 days ago by a reporter who said, I'm doing a story on why there's no peace movement in the United States against this war in Ukraine. And I was telling some of our friends here that this guy went to Amherst, Massachusetts, and went to the peace vigil that's been happening since the 1960s, and said he talked to everybody at that vigil, and all of them were in favor of sending weapons to Ukraine. So we are working with folks to talk to those people and see if indeed that is the truth, and make sure that people go to that vigil who are opposed to sending more weapons to Ukraine. But in any case, tomorrow at noon in Amherst. Yes, so let's get some folks there. And, in Amherst, yes. And we need to show that in those days of action, there are people doing things. And you know very well, living in small towns, that you can have 5 or 6 people out in the street, and that is an action. So please help us to have these happening all over the country. And I want to end just by saying that sometimes when we feel that we are pushed to the fringe and that we are not representing the majority voices who want to keep supporting the resistance in Ukraine, to remember that the global majority really, really wants to see an end to this war. And that the global majority is represented by leaders who are doing all kinds of things to try to end this war. And they are being pushed and pushed by the United States to take sides. And, you know, these are countries that say, we don't want to. And so I want to end with the voice of somebody I think represents the global majority, and that is the president of Brazil, who is known by the name of AMLO. And President Lula. President AMLO from Mexico is also very much against this war and is creating a club of nations to try to find a solution. But in Brazil, President Lula was invited to the White House by Biden, and Biden said to him, you must send weapons to Ukraine. And he came out and said, we are not going to send weapons to Ukraine. What Ukraine needs is not more weapons. It needs interlocutors who will talk to the Russians and say what a terrible mistake they made by invading Ukraine, and talk to the Ukrainians and say, you must come to the peace table. What Ukraine needs is not more weapons. He said, we do not want to join this war. We want to end this war. And let's take that as our call. We do not want to keep throwing fuel on the fire of this war. We want to end this war. Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to do a question and answer. And I was going to ask Chris, who I think you're with Public Access TV, is that true? If people have questions in the audience, will the microphone pick it up, or should I hand a microphone? This mic? I'm not sure what you said.
So what we're asking speakers to do is to present their questions, and whoever is up here next to the mic will repeat that question, and so that our awesome
Is that a place I could do that in?
No, you can do it right here.
Well, maybe Medea could.
Yes.
Good. And will you call on people as well? Okay, and then after the question and answer, it's going to be some music, and you're going to announce that. Am I right? What? Oh, stretch. Let's all stand. Let's reach to the sky. Sweet Carol. Come on. And then maybe reach one arm a little higher, and then the other arm a little higher, and stretch your side. Take a nice breath. And do whatever you want, whatever feels good. You can wiggle your hips a little bit. The hips are good. Oh, yeah. And you can shake out your hand a little. And you can shake out the other hand. This looks like you have a great idea. That's called empowerment right there. I need it in my shoulders. Okay. So Medea will call on you, and she'll repeat the question so that the media can hear it.
I'm wondering if you see any kind of analogy between what Putin did in terms of attacking the Ukraine and it being condemned internationally, and what George W. Bush did in going into Iraq and it being condemned internationally.
So is there an analogy between what Putin did in invading Ukraine and the international outcry against that, and Bush invading Iraq and the international? So, it's, you don't want to make comparisons between atrocities, but I think it is important to say that the United States was not provoked at all to go into Iraq, and this was not a country on our border. This is a country many, many thousands of miles away, and it was, entirely built on lies, and the U.S. strong-armed in those days was able to strong-arm a coalition. It was a coalition of the willing, right? Dozens of countries to go in on this totally illegal invasion. It's interesting today the U.S. doesn't have the same kind of power to strong-arm countries as it used to. And so you see today, while certainly the countries of Western Europe are condemning the invasion, and at votes at the United Nations, you see majority of countries condemning the invasion, they are not following the sanctions. And they really are saying, we don't want to get involved. So I think two things have changed. One is the power of the United States has lessened, has gone down since then. And that people, especially in countries known as the Global South, now see the U.S. as hypocrites. And the Western world as hypocrites in general for doing the very things that they condemn Russia for now.
Thank you, Medea, for your leadership on these issues. And I want to ask for your leadership on something we haven't touched on yet today, which is the pushback. We heard what you're getting from some peace churches, the pushback against you, but there's pushback in general against peace activists. We saw and continue to see the horrible persecution of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, and now we've seen your organization, Code Pink, be targeted by Senator Marco Rubio and the New York Times for not parroting the mainstream narrative on China. So what advice do you have us in resisting that?
Yeah, I think, for those of you who don't know what Jill is referring to in terms of the New York Times article and the Marco Rubio tax, there was this incredibly an article in the New York Times that was full of disinformation, full of innuendos, full of distortions about a wealthy guy who is married to the co-founder of Code Pink and lives in China and has been Marxist all his life, came from a Marxist background, his father a well-known Caribbean Marxist intellectual, and he became a wealthy entrepreneur, but still stuck to his roots of believing in socialism, sold his company, started living in China, and liked it there. And he has been giving money to causes that he believes in. And so this article came out and looked at, quote, the web of places that he funds around the world that are like trade unions in South Africa, media outlets in Ghana, all sorts of fabulous groups and things that he is funding. In Landless movement in Brazil, he helps out Code Pink, he helps out a place called the People's Forum in New York City that's become the center of progressive activism, a publication called Tricontinental run by a very, very incredible writer and speaker, Vijay Prashad. What this article basically said is this web is, these are all Chinese agents, and they are parroting the talking points of the Chinese government, and Marco Rubio says we should be investigated by the Department of Justice for violating the, what's called the FARA Act, Foreign Agent Registration Act. And, you know, we can laugh at this because it is laughable to think that we are agents of the Communist Party of China. It is kind of funny. We have, you know, zero connection to the Communist Party of China. And yet, you know, look back to the days of McCarthyism and how they dug up on and invented all kinds of things against progressive groups to show them as being communist. And the fact that there is this FARA Act, and it's very broad and can be used for a lot of things. It's not just Code Pink that's been attacked, and it's not just around China. We just talked about how we're called Putin apologists, having Putin talking points. So it is very, very disturbing, and I think we should see it as attacks on the entire peace movement. We've put out a call saying, calling on people to oppose this new McCarthyism, and there's a petition on the Code Pink website that you can sign if you would like to be one of the many thousands of people who are now putting their names out there to say no to new McCarthyism.
Hi there, Nadia. I bet you know where I'm going on this question.
I do not.
What's missing from the conversation? Let's hear it. Somebody North Street. What? Pipelines. Oil and pipelines. Right. May I enlarge the discussion just for a few minutes, then I'm going to ask you about Nord Stream 2. So why do I know about...
Why don't you come up because they can't hear you on the recording.
Do these mics work? Yeah, they do.
Okay, thank you.
We all love Charlotte, right?
Follow the pipelines. That's the name of my book. Oh. You don't have a loud voice. Oh, okay. Okay. Yes.
But we can't make it too long.
No, I won't. Hit me when it, okay? No, just briefly. I watched the beginnings of the war in Ukraine, and the first thing that tipped me off right away, what was the first sanction that the US and the NATO countries put on Russia? Nord Stream 2, exactly. The Nord Stream pipeline. How do I know about the Nord Stream pipeline? Because I've now been identified by Time magazine as an expert in oil-related issues. And that's because I've devoted a long time to showing that it is oil that is the basis of all these endless wars. And so right off in March, I started writing about it. And I predicted that Ukraine would be the mother of all energy wars. And so how do you look at that? First of all, there's the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. What is it? Why is it so important? Because it's bringing more oil and natural gas to Europe. And the US does not want that. And Biden has come right out and said it. You know, we don't want to be dependent on Europe. And that's why there is this tremendous effort to find other alternative sources of oil and natural gas. The other reason, I'll just speak up on the why oil, it's still not recognized today that it is a national security issue. That's why you don't hear about it. Oil is the fuel of the military, and it has been ever since the beginning of the major wars. Well, World War I was really watershed on that. If you don't control your fuel supplies, you're in deep trouble. So any power that wants to see itself as a major power has to be sure it has access to the oil which will fuel the military. And the military is, we all know this, it's the biggest consumer of oil. So that's why you don't hear about it. It's why I've had to devote myself to keep pushing this issue, because you don't hear about it. I feel it's my obligation. I'll end with just this one point, that the eastern Donbass, why is all the fighting there? Well, yes, it's on the border, true. Eastern Donbass has the richest oil and gas reserves in Europe, not counting Russia. Think about that. When I hear Biden saying, we're going to be in there as long as it takes. Well, as long as it takes what? So that you get access to that oil and natural gas and deprive Russia of it? Final point, the Obama administration was eyeing getting U.S. companies to go in and exploit the oil in the eastern region. And that was the Obama administration. Vice President Biden advocated for that. What's Burisma? What is Burisma? It's the largest oil and gas company in Ukraine. And they were angling to get in there. So there's been a long, long strategy of trying to get into and control those oil and gas reserves. And by the way, the Black Sea, which Crimea sits on, it's loaded with oil and gas, okay? As is the Caspian. All these maps are in my book, and I'm sorry for the shameless self-promotion, but in this age of censorship and so on, you've got to fight to get your ideas out. Right. So I just want to tell you, follow the pipelines. It'll tell you the origin of all these endless wars. Thank you, Medea.
Thank you. So when we see who benefits from this war, we have to talk about the weapons industry that has had insanely record profits. But we also have to talk about the energy companies, because they have had the highest profits, both the oil and the gas companies, the highest profits last year than they have ever had, because they have jumped in to replace the Russian energy that was going to Europe, that was the backbone of the Russian industry, of the German industry. And that is creating a lot of problems for the Europeans right now. So thank you, Charlotte, for bringing up the issue about the other industry, aside from weapons, that is really benefiting from this war.
Just to add one thing, Hitler's drive to Ukraine was largely because of oil. That's where it all started, if you look at history. But my question is this. The Pope, being from that part of Catholicism, is all for peace. The Russian Orthodox Church supports Putin. What does the Ukrainian Orthodox Church?
There's been the question is about the Orthodox churches in Russia that supports Putin, and the Ukraine Orthodox Church, there's been a split, and they support Zelensky. And I just want to, you said the basis of this conflict being oil. I would modify that a bit and saying that is an important factor, but there has been a huge division for a long time between eastern and western Ukraine, the western part being much more looking towards Europe and wanting to be part of the European Union, and the eastern part being closer to Russia. And this came from the lines that were drawn and the way that the Soviet Union dissolved. There's various factors, and of course, we have to look at the power of the weapons industry that we haven't talked about either, and recognize that they are so infiltrated in our government. I mentioned the Secretary of Defense coming from Raytheon, but you can trace, so many of the people that are in the White House and in Congress that come from the weapons industry as well. So let's see, there were a couple more people, lots more people. I'll take a couple of comments and then address them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Militarization. In Burlington, there's a group called Safe Landing B2B, and they created a resolution where we're asking that the Vermont International Guard report emissions from the F-35 program. This is our first victory on the F-35s in about 4 years. And I'm just mentioning it because I feel like it's important to just spread the word among other peace activists that there is organizing going on that coalesces the climate movement with our anti-militarism movement.
If you could just summarize that quickly with your link.
Okay, so we had a recent victory where the Vermont International Guard is being asked by the Burlington City Council to report F-35 emissions starting on April 1st. Now the Vermont Guard has said we're going to just carry on with what we're doing, so that might be another place to direct some of your phone calls. But I wanted to just ask you, Medea, if you have any thoughts about the on-the-ground effort here addressing the F-35 because it's damaging militarily. I don't even know if it's being used in Ukraine presently. Thank you for that. And it also is a nuclear-capable airplane. So we're working to eliminate it completely. In the meantime, the basing is harming children in our community and causing neurological problems. VTANG has also polluted the Winooski River with PFAS chemicals. So those are some of our local issues, and I just wondered if you had thoughts on strategy about how local and global movements can work together.
Thank you. Well, pass it around to a couple.
Who's next?
Following up on Charlotte's most succinct talk about economic interest in oil and gas. Ukraine is also a host of other focus of economic development going on now, such as the absolute acquisition of their fertile farmlands by corporate interest, mining interest, and other interests in Larry Fink and BlackRock, and they are privatizing everything. And I thought maybe we could speak a little bit more to that.
Excellent.
Who else?
No, I'll answer them all together. We'll just go a little quicker.
Thanks again so much for being here. My question is about this group in Amherst, and we have one in Montpelier, and we have one in every major city, the peace activists, and they're apparently not able to hear the reasons for why this war is so wrong. Do you have any succinct talking points where you can kind of get them to nudge over? I approached our junior senator, Peter Welch, about this 2 months ago, and I got the same gaslighting, and then I brought up Zaporizhzhia and some other things, and he didn't continue. But it's really hard to move liberals who believe this is a just war. And yet, to those of us in the room who have been tracking this, it's so frustrating to try to get them back. Do you have any thoughts on how to get them back? Bring up the video.
Okay, I'll do those three. So the F-35, I just want to congratulate you and the people in Vermont who've been working on that. I know it's a campaign that we've been working with you at Code Pink because we've been very concerned about the F-35 for so many reasons, including that it's the most expensive boondoggle of the military, and it should be just canceled. So we are excited that we're already in a campaign working with you, and how important it is to have these firsthand testimonies from people in your community, how you're being harmed by the F-35. And also, this is one of the other things that we don't have Bernie Sanders on our side. In fact, he was very instrumental, right, in bringing the F-35 to the National Guard in Vermont. So let's add it to that list when we do the sit-in. And then it was the issue about the other economic interests. And thank you, Barbara, for bringing those up, because, you know, we have to look at the moneyed interest, unfortunately, in these wars. So we talked about the weapons industry, we talked about the energy, the dirty energy companies, and then there are the ones that you brought up, and this push to privatization has been going full steam ahead during the war. And there's a website that you can go on where you see Zelensky saying the best economic opportunity since World War II, and inviting all these companies in to take over the agricultural land, to take over the resources. And BlackRock has already signed a memo of understanding with Zelensky that it would be financing a lot of this reconstruction. So it is something behind the scenes in a sense, but in plain sight for anybody who wants to look at it. I mean, go right onto this website and is an example of those who are very anxiously not only profiting from the war itself, but looking to profit from hopefully a peace process. I'll get the website in a minute. Well, that shows the Zelensky investing, how you can invest. And the other is, how do we turn these people around? And we have a couple of good resources that I think in terms of materials on the Peace in Ukraine website. There are things from handouts as well as a very good 10-minute video that we did on the connection between environment and the war in Ukraine, and then an 18-minute video that we have that lays out the whole basis for this war and is a summary of this book. And then talk about shameless promotion. I guess I might as well promote this book. This book we really put together very, very quickly as a primer to what is happening. We've taken it and somebody gave us the money to give it to every progressive, a member of the Progressive Caucus in Congress. Is Peter Welch part of that? Oh, well, now he's a senator. So we're giving this out, and we encourage people to buy copies, read it yourself so you're more comfortable about talking about these issues, but also pass it on to people that you've had a problem talking about this, because it's written in a very plain way and I think a very fair way as well. So those are some of the resources. I also think that as time goes by, there are more people who are coming around, because I think you can say to people, whether you agree that the US had a major role to play in setting the stage for this war or interfering in Ukraine's internal affairs, because there are many people who disagree with that and say the uprising was a purely indigenous, spontaneous uprising against a corrupt government, and that the US role and the role of NATO have been minimal in this. You can say, we don't have to agree on that. We can agree to disagree on that. I want to ask you, where is this going? Where is your end point? Where do you see the conflict being resolved? Do you really think it's going to be resolved on the battlefield, in these trenches, where these poor, mostly young men are being killed every day? Huh?
It's up to the Ukrainians.
Well, the Ukrainians have the right to resist, but we don't have the obligation to keep fueling this war. And, the gentleman earlier talked about the coup in Niger. Well, I'm sure that the civilian government that was just overthrown is asking for weapons from the world community. Are we going to start pouring weapons into there? I mean, the U.S. picks and chooses. Certainly there are oppressed people like the Palestinians who one would think have the right to resist their oppressors. And yet imagine would the US be sending weapons into Palestine to resist the Israelis? So we don't have to keep a conflict going, especially as irresponsibly when we know from our own military that they are not going to be able to win on the ground. So I would just say, ask them, where is this going? And say, can't we come together in saying we want this to end? You can even keep saying that you want to send weapons, but will you agree at least that we should advocate for a ceasefire and negotiations? And try to find some common ground.
So there's more back here.
So you mentioned the Global South and a lot of the calls there are around the UN Charter, and obviously this war, that's a very complex topic. But I wonder whether some of the solution to this war, because it's such a long historical geopolitical context, whether some of the solution might come from, and this is, kind of utopian thinking, but whether it might come from an emphasis on getting pledges from NATO about respecting the UN Charter elsewhere in order to resolve this conflict here.
Does this one work okay? No? No. Okay. I'll take two.
Hi, my name is Sandy Good. I'm an attorney in Burlington, and I have the great privilege of working at my office, rather, is with the African Association of Africans Living in Vermont. And it was pointed out early in this conflict why it was a mind-blowing situation when I heard this information. A man that I work with who's here, Erica Nero, came back from Ivory Coast, and he pointed out to me that all over Ivory Coast, and this was a couple of years ago, there were pro-Putin signs. And he pointed out that almost the entire black and brown world is either neutral or actually pro-Russia and pro-Putin. And sometimes I've used that argument, look, the world is not with us. NATO countries are the white countries in Europe, the white capitalist countries. But the black and brown world are not with us. And if they make a choice, it's usually it's two choices. Either they're neutral and they're pressing for peace, as you pointed out with President Lula, or they're actively pro-Russia and China. That somehow does convince people that maybe this isn't such a hot idea.
So on the first one about getting a pledge from NATO, I think, NATO, we have to work for the dissolution of NATO. We want an end to NATO. NATO is the most dangerous military alliance in the world. And we see what it's doing right now to keep this war going, to try to weaken Russia. But even while this is happening, at their last meeting in Vilnius in Lithuania, who did they invite to the meeting? They invited their Asia-Pacific partners. They invited South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand to strengthen that partnership against China, because they're already, just like the US strategy, they are gearing up for a war against China. And if we think this war is bad, imagine what a war with China would look like. So yeah, I don't think we can convince NATO to respect the sovereignty of other nations when NATO itself is a big part of the problem. In terms of your very interesting comments about the black and brown world, who between the United States and Russia, which was the country that supported Nelson Mandela and the anti-apartheid movement? It was Russia. In every liberation struggle, I lived in Africa for 10 years, and I saw my government trying to overthrow every progressive government that was going to do something for its people. and the Russians supporting the governments that actually wanted to do something for their people. And so you have a long history in Africa of people who were thankful for the Russians' help when they were trying to liberate themselves from the Portuguese, liberate themselves from the British, liberate themselves from the French and the other colonists. You also have the issue of China. And, here the U.S. is going now to African countries. You might have seen Victoria Nuland herself not only going to Niger, but then stopping off in South Africa and, trying to do the old U.S. trick of saying, if you don't support us, we're going to take away your aid, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And I mentioned the U.S. doesn't have that strength anymore. And a lot of that is thanks to China. So we can criticize and should criticize China for human rights abuses of the Uyghurs, for criticize China for a lot of global projects that have been destructive of the environment or have led countries in Africa into debt. But we also have to recognize that China didn't go in with its military. China went in with economic aid, and China has produced a lot of projects as part of the Belt and Road Initiative that have been transformational for countries in Africa and managed to have all kinds of shipping ports and freeways that connect places that have never been connected before, put in 5G. And there are places in Africa that are better connected than we are in Washington, D.C. So China has done a lot to lift people out of poverty. And the last thing I want to say about that is the way the Chinese themselves have lifted people out of poverty. And this is something extraordinary. My training has been as a nutritionist, and I worked all over Africa. And my deepest desire was to stop children from being malnourished. And I started working also working not just on issues of malnourished children, but also about sweatshops, because there was such abuse in those sweatshops. And I went to China in the 80s and saw the abuses inside the sweatshops making things for U.S. companies. Well, I've been back there recently, and those U.S. companies have left because they can't afford the wages in China anymore. The wages have gone way up, and China has done extraordinary things to pull up the last 100 million people that were in poverty. And there was an extraordinary film, a documentary made by a Wall Street banker for PBS to show how China had lifted people out of poverty. And it has been censored now because of the backlash in the U.S. against that, because they don't want to see they don't want people in the U.S. to see that you actually can eliminate poverty if you really care about it. So I don't know when somebody's going to stop us. How much more time do we have? I'll get the 4 minutes left. So I'll get you the name of the film and the name of how you can invest in Ukraine. And we have maybe time for 2 more questions.
Speaking of, there's this sort of zoom in, zoom out mentality, and thinking about small towns in Vermont, what we actually can do by speaking person to person with our neighbors and wandering alongside them. And I think that there's a real radical power to that. That's a Vermont perspective. But in terms of, zooming out into the international situation and then back home, and the idea of eliminating poverty, if we really care enough about it. I'm interested in the candidacy of Cornel West, and I wonder if you have any thoughts about him as a candidate that you might want to share. Thank you.
Let's take that one more.
Oh, yeah.
What? Yeah.
I really enjoyed your book, Medea, and I think you covered it, but I think you left out a little bit about
civil war in Donbass, the Donetsk and Lugansk, and the development of the People's Republics of those two. This is within the Donbass. The people that resisted for those 8 years of civil war, and 14,000 were killed. So I think it's so important to understand people in the eastern Ukraine. It's on the border of Russia, and why those referendums took place. Now, a lot of people, I think because of Russophobia, do not believe that those referendums were authentic, but they were. They had international observers, election observers. But that part is so important to get over our Russophobia, to investigate and look into who are the people of Donbass besides the fact they have oil and gas fields. Learn about the people in eastern Ukraine and maybe why they resisted when the People's Republics developed. It was before the Civil War. So they were already in place as soon as the coup happened. And even before, they were developing their own militias and opposition. It wasn't Russia. They begged Russia to come in, but Russia refused. They didn't want this to happen. They did not want to start what actually happened, the invasion. So it's worth, I don't know how much you covered in that. I think you did cover some of this. So maybe you want to talk about what you covered in your book, which was so important.
So I'll go backwards, starting with that, because people say, well, what about the Ukrainians? The Ukrainians have the right to resist, and you have to say, well, which Ukrainians are we talking about? There are Ukrainians in the Donbass who have wanted to be autonomous. There are many referendums that have been done in Crimea that have shown, even back in 1991, when the Soviet Union was dissolving and Ukraine declared its independence, there was a referendum, and this is pre-Putin, where 94% of the people said that they didn't want to be part of Ukraine. So it is important to recognize this division, and that's why I said let's not just say it's oil or it's weapons or this. There is this division that has existed for a long time and is really at the heart of this conflict. The other issue is, I wanted to give you the website, and just if you could look at this, because it's called The Greatest Opportunity in Europe Since World War II, and it's got Zelensky's face on there. And the website is called AdvantageUkraine.com. But there are also many other websites. Just if you Google "invest in Ukraine," you'll see many of them. The film on poverty, which I really recommend you all watch because it is mind-blowing. The level of work that went into pulling individual families out of poverty is just amazing. And it's called China's War on Poverty, and you can get it on YouTube. And
it was a PBS production.
Yes, yeah.
PBS production. It was censored right after it showed.
And we have my partner and I, and can I give a hand to my partner who does so much of this work? Including all these great visuals, but he and I were among others who protested at PBS, and we just asked, can we talk to you? And instead of letting us up to talk, called the police against us.
PBS actually has a free speech. PBS actually has a free speech law. It's about 350 feet from their front door. Unbelievable. I mean, there's offices, there's all kinds of things. It's an office, warehouse. But it says PBS at the top, and they control the joint, I guess.
So is there one question I didn't answer?
Yeah, I have a question about Cornell.
Oh, about Cornell, yeah. So, as I mentioned, there are now these presidential candidates who are speaking in a very different way about this issue. And I find it just beautiful to listen to Cornell when he talks about this. In fact, so beautiful that we've invited him for this week of action. He will give a talk on Ukraine in Washington, D.C. on October 3rd. If you're interested, we'll also be live streaming it so you can hear what will probably be the longest talk he's given on Ukraine since he started this campaign, because it's usually, been snippets in a larger interview. So that will be really great. I think maybe this is a good way to end, because one of the beautiful things about Cornel West is that his deep, deep, deep being and the way he expresses things is really coming from a place of love. And that comes through so much, whether he's talking about my dear brother Sean Hannity when he's on Fox News, or whether it's the references he makes to people not only in the jazz and the music world, but to people who've been the leaders of movements like Nelson Mandela throughout the world. And so we can really learn a lot just listening to him. And I think it is so fabulous that somebody with that depth of knowledge and the beautiful way of speaking about these difficult issues is now reaching millions of people. And while we talked about the lack of young people in our movement, we should also talk about the lack of diversity in our movement. And yet, it is the Black community that has been consistently the most anti-war community in this country. And they might not come out to our events, they might not stand out on the street corner with us, but they are there with us. And it shows in the opinion polls that are taken when they break it down by ethnicities, the ones who are really the most anti-war, for many, many, many reasons. And I think that we should recognize that one of the reasons they might not be out on the streets with us is because there are so many other issues that community is facing that are life and death issues day by day in their own communities. And I know that many of us are out there with organizations like Black Lives Matter that are struggling with those issues. But Cornell is somebody who really reaches into the Black community, reaches into the faith-based community, and I think can do wonders in terms of countering the narrative that we're hearing, which is that war is peace and peace is war, and that these Democrats really have to be shamed. And that's why I think things like sit-ins are very important. Cornell, we've gotten arrested with him on many occasions, always, as they say, beautiful trouble. And he is somebody who has put his body on the line time and time again through civil disobedience. And I think this is a time and a lot of issues for civil disobedience, and I really am anxious for September to come when Congress is back in, because we've had enough of calling their offices, we've had enough for asking for meetings, we've had enough of Zoom calls with their staff, and as Isaac said, just getting the runaround over and over again on these issues. And it is time for civil disobedience on all of the issues that we've talked about today. So I think we should have a summer of peace. And you can look at some of the ideas we have on our Code Pink website for Summer of Peace, but we really need a fall of resistance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Medea. This was really inspiring and given us our own energy to go forth and spread the word. I was at a rally about 2 weeks ago, and there was a woman with a Code Pink shirt on. Not on? Oh, there. Okay. And I said to her, well, Medea Benjamin is coming to Rochester. And she said, Medea Benjamin was her mother's best, she admired her more than anyone else, but her mother died just a
I don't know what, recently. And I said, well, you should come and sing. This is a musician. And so Emily Laxner and her co-musician Ero Veno is going to play some music now, and they represent Pollinators for Peace. And you can see the buzz of the pollinator for peace right there. This is Emily.
Just one quick announcement before Pollinators for Peace takes the stand. Can we have another round of applause for all of our speakers today? So I see that Eileen and Nancy are already busy at it, passing out Post-it notes. Now you might be wondering what those are for. If you'll notice in the back, there is an easel to share your thoughts, share your feelings, share your questions. You might not have had a chance to really ask the question you wanted today, or maybe you're walking away thinking like, what did I learn today, and being a little reflective. I would invite you to use your Post-it note, write your thoughts, feelings, questions on it, and then please place it on the large white Post-it note in the back. Thank you all so much, and Pollinators for Peace, take it away.
Thank you so much, Christine, and big thank you to Medea Benjamin. It's such an honor to be here with you today, Medea. My mom's name was Jean Langsner, and she lived right near Washington, D.C., and I think she probably joined you in some of your demonstrations there once or twice.
So good to be with all of you here today, and to know that so many of us are still standing up for peace and so many other things. This first song is about the refugee crisis, and as we know, which is caused by, in large part, by wars and endless wars that just keep displacing people. 1, 2, 3. Humanity. Sorry, wrong chord. Okay. Humanity. Whatever happened to humanity? Whatever happened to humanity? Is it something that will ever be? Insanity. Whatever happened to humanity? Whatever happened to humanity? Is it something that will ever be? Forced to flee desperately, regrettably, refugee crisis, refugee crisis, refugee crisis, refugee crisis, crisis, Afghanistan, refugee, Syria, Lebanon, refugee, Congo, Somalia, Sudan. It saddens me and makes me angry when people must flee their home and country. Crisis, refugee crisis, refugee crisis, refugee crisis. Libya, Palestine, Iraq, Rwanda, Myanmar, Nigeria, Sierra Leone. I wish that we could one day see an end to the crisis.
their numbers grow. Whoa, crisis.
Thank you. It's a lot of suffering there. We're praying for peace. This is a prayer for peace. We call it, what do we call it? Wings of peace.
May peace increase. May be the driving force, the course we take. For goodness sake, may all creatures see that peace is the way to be. May all creatures be free and live in harmony. May peace increase. May it be the driving force, the course we take. For goodness sake, free from suffering, injustice and despair. May there never be another war. May poverty be no more. May we all flourish and thrive. May love be real and alive. May peace and light increase and light. May peace and light. May peace prevail. On the wings of peace may we sail forevermore. No more war, no more war. Free from suffering, injustice and despair. May there never be another war. May poverty be no more. May we all flourish and thrive. May love be well and alive. May peace and alive increase and alive. May peace and alive. May peace prevail. On the wings of peace may we sail forevermore. No more war, 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 no more
Well,
talk about
we
the
are
insect holocaust.
Pollinator for Peace, the insect holocaust. Yes, there is a war on the environment as well. And this is our signature song.
Theme song.
Yeah.
And we have a radio show called The Pollinator Report, and this is a theme song.
And we just came from a pollinator parade in West Newbury this morning. It was awesome.
Bees, butterflies, bats, and birds, they're in trouble, have you heard? Bats protect their habitats. Bats, butterflies, birds, and bees, pollinators. Pollinators need protection from harmful human intervention. They are essential to our survival. We can be their partners, not their rivals. If not for them, there is no doubt we would have to do without. We would have to let go of the foods we need and love. One more time. There you go. Pollinator, pollinator, pollinator. It is your nature to fly about from flower to flower, day after day, hour after hour. Pollinator, pollinator, pollinator.
Thank you. Yes, we have one more. Ah. This one's not as happy sounding, but I wrote this during the Occupy movement, and so I don't know. Here we go. Oh my God.
Corporate greed will not feed the masses. We want the oligarchy out on their asses. We are the
Thank you so much, everybody. It's been a great honor to be here today. I'm really happy to see all this work happening, and I'm happy to see it documented. I hope we can spread that around and watch it, whatever is being filmed. What is the station where we can watch this? Oh, Orca Media from out of Montpelier? Okay, super. Thanks again to Medea Benjamin.
Well, sure, we can do that too. Just wanted to say thank you all again for coming. Thank you. A big hand to, where did she go? Robin Lloyd. Where is she? A big hand to Robin Lloyd, wherever she's gone, for organizing this and being the person who brings us all together. Thank you so much and have a wonderful afternoon.